Okay, hi. So in this next video, what I want to talk about is basically vocabulary and memories. For me, it's one of the best things to remember. It's one of the best things that I've come across in language learning. If you think about your first language, all of the vocabulary that I have in my first language, English, is very strongly associated. First of all, there's no translation because it's my first language, but it's just English vocabulary, and each of those words are associated with memories, with mental images, and they're very deeply connected. The vocabulary is deeply connected with memories, mental pictures, maybe mental ideas of what the word represents. So for some things like cat or table, it's quite easy. But then for something else, like for a word like already is a difficult thing to, first of all, you can't see it. You have to experience already. But I have a concept, an idea of what already is. If someone wants to do something, but I've done it first, I can say, no, it's okay, I have done it already. But it's kind of that concept, but there's different variations of it as well. But it's basically something like that. So now, when it comes to learning a second language, the problem is all of those mental memories, those mental images, those concepts, those ideas, that world is kind of separate from language. There's a linguist called Steven Pinker, and he talks about mentalese. For me, what I think of it is that it's a sort of a visual representation of the world that you have in your mind, separate to language. And we've got this kind of imagination tool where here I can imagine, the table lifting up into the air. It's kind of like a computer game in a way. It's a simulation of reality. There's some supercomputers that do this. They actually test out virtual rockets lifting off into space, but it's completely virtual. But our brain basically does the same thing. I mean, I can simulate reality. That is kind of separate to language, but it's very, very strongly connected with language. So if I have a story for someone, I can picture the story. I can see all the events, the people, and then when I go to explain it to someone, the vocabulary that I need is very strongly connected to that world, that mental, visual world, the mentalese that exists in your mind. So now when you learn a second language, now things become tricky because now you've got two separate vocabularies which are trying to connect to that visual world. The mentalese, or the imaginary world, or the representation of the real world that's in your mind. You can see this with some people. Some people are very realistic, which means their vision of the world matches reality. There's other people in the world who have an unrealistic vision of the world. So that's what I'm talking about there. It's that internal visual world that you have in your mind. So now when we're learning a second language, generally what we tend to do is, for example, if you've got a text and if you're reading and if you find a word, think about this very carefully. When you're reading a text and you come across or find, that's a phrasal verb there, come across, but if you find a word that you don't know, what is your process? Just sit down and think about, what is the process that you go through? And for most students, what they do is, okay, so you're reading a text, you find the word, first thing you do, maybe you could use Google Translate, and translate it into your first language. Now, if you move on from there, if you just translate it and then, okay, now, you understand it. Now, if you move on, continue with the text, what you do is you create a very shallow, thin. Shallow is the opposite of deep. If you imagine the ocean, okay, that's deep. Now, when you get to the beach and you're walking in and the water is only up to your feet, that's shallow. So it's very thin, okay? So if you only translate vocabulary, you're creating a very shallow meaning. Now, another thing that you could do is you could go to word reference, or you could get out your English dictionary and you could look for English definitions. So you're trying to understand the word using easier English vocabulary to understand that word. So now, and then you could read and then you could try and understand that word through context, and that's good. So now things are getting a little deeper. The meaning of that word is getting a little deeper because you've got context and you've used English words to try and understand that difficult word. But what we want to do is, the goal for me anyway, is my next challenge is to learn Chinese. And the goal for me is to create really, really strong, deep connections. The way that I have connections for my English vocabulary, if I think of the word war, I mean, right now I can imagine, I can remember Vietnam War movies that I've seen, or, World War II documentaries, or, I've seen news reports on CNN about war. When I say the word war, I automatically, I can visualize these images and these memories. So I want to do the same in Chinese. I want a direct connection between the Chinese word and what it represents. One way you could do it is, so we've tried translation, we've tried looking for an English definition. We can try and understand the word through context of the story. Then what we could also do is maybe do something like go to Google Images and put the word into Google Images, and you will get a selection of pictures for that word. Now, it's very easy to find Google Images for things like cat, table, house, soccer, sports, things like that. But when you try and use Google Images for words like is, what is? Is, or already, or yet, things like those, or alternative. But Google Images will actually surprise you, because a word like alternative, you wouldn't think that Google Images would give you a good picture, but it actually does. So try and use Google Images as much as possible, because you're creating a visual memory. When you find that word and when you go to Google Images and you see those pictures, in that moment there, you're creating a visual memory. And in the future, you're going to connect that picture to the word. And when you try and remember it, it'll be easier.